Welcome back to Season 4 of the How We Can Heal podcast. My name is Lisa Danylchuk, and I'm a psychotherapist specializing in trauma treatment. I created this podcast because I'm surrounded by people who have dedicated their lives to navigating healing. There is so much wisdom in each guest this season, and my hope is that this show makes their important ideas and experiences available to you in a way that uplifts and inspires you. These guests and I have committed our lives to fostering health and joy in the world, even as we work through the impacts of trauma and face deep challenges. Let's dive into Season 4 and let's keep talking about how we can heal. I want to give a big shout out and extend a huge thank you to the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation, the ISSTD, for sponsoring this episode. If you've been listening to this podcast for any amount of time, you've heard me talk about the ISSTD and the incredible researchers, clinicians, and advocates I've met during my time as a member and a volunteer there. This group is made up of some of the kindest, most inspiring, intelligent people, and I'm happy to be able to share just a few of them here on the show. This organization has been delving into the science and best practice of treating trauma and dissociation for over 40 years now, and they have a rich catalog of educational offerings for both professionals and non-professionals on their website. That's cfas.isst-d.org. If you're a mental health professional, I highly recommend you consider becoming a member of ISSTD. I'd love to see you during their live educational offerings and at the annual conference in Boston in March of 2025. Go to isst-d.org to learn more. Welcome back to the How We Can Heal podcast. Today, our guest is Dr. Donna Hicks. Dr. Donna Hicks is a psychologist specializing in conflict resolution who has operationalized and popularized the concept of dignity. She has facilitated dialogues in the Middle East, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Colombia, Cuba, Libya, and Syria, and served as deputy director of the Program on International Conflict Analysis and Resolution. She was also a consultant to the BBC in Northern Ireland, where she co-facilitated a television series, Facing the Truth, with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Donna is an associate at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University and has taught courses in conflict resolution at Harvard and Columbia universities. She also offers training around the world on dignity leadership and the role dignity plays in resolving conflict. Her books, Dignity, Its Essential Role in Resolving Conflict, and Leading with Dignity, How to Create a Culture That Brings Out the Best in People, were published by Yale University Press in 2011 and 2018. Donna and I first connected in 2018 at the ISSTD conference in Chicago, where she was a speaker. I loved her presentation, but was even more impressed by the way I saw her modeling leading with dignity in even the smallest interactions throughout the conference. I am thrilled to share this conversation with her today, so let's welcome Donna to the show. Thank you so much for being here. I know you're in high demand, and I know your time and your work are so valuable, and I'm so excited to share this with the How We Can Heal podcast audience, and I hope everyone who listens shares it with 10, 100 friends, because as I was just saying, I feel like I want your work to be like downloaded into the cells of everyone. It just feels so central and so important. And ever since I've learned about it, I've referenced it in my writing and my teaching, because it's just language that gets at something that I feel like a lot of times we're just struggling to find. We're just struggling to land on one of those 10 elements of dignity, which I'll mention. Anyhow, welcome to the How We Can Heal podcast. Thank you for being here. And I'm so happy to see you.
My pleasure, Lisa. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, so I feel like there's a lot we could cover today. I want to just start with a little bit of context of what led you to the work of dignity and the word of dignity.
Yeah, well, it's a long story that I'll make short, but the truth is this concept and this word dignity has been following me around my entire life. And it wasn't until I started doing, I started my career in international conflict resolution and saw how dignity played such a profound role in the breakdown of relationships at the international level. And they were, we'd be sitting at these negotiating tables because I was a mediator, and the parties would be back and forth talking about all of the political issues that divided them. And
Yeah.
I'm a psychologist, and what I look for sitting at those tables is what's not being said.
Yes.
And one of the things, Lisa, that was true no matter where I was, whether I was in the Middle East, Asia, Africa, Europe, that there was a missing link in our understanding of what really created these conflicts to begin with. And that had to do with that people's dignity.
Yeah.
That I finally figured this out, because as a psychologist, I'd say, oh my gosh, these people are traumatized,
Right.
They're experiencing so much emotional trauma. And I remember once saying to them, oh, wow, that reaction that I just saw you have was such a deeply emotional reaction. I said, would you be willing to talk about it? And that they got so upset, and they would say, emotions? This isn't about emotions. This is about justice. This is about, I said, okay, sorry. So then the next time I saw it happen, I used the word trauma.
Yeah.
Because I thought, well, they're traumatized. How could they not be traumatized? They hated that word too.
Uh-huh.
Which kind of surprised me, because, I spent so much time searching the trauma literature to find a way into the discussion and bringing this into the discussion. But they just don't, people who are engaged in these terrible, terrible conflicts don't want to be thought of as weak or emotional, or they want to be understood as having a serious issue of justice and equity and all of that. So one day I said to myself, okay, you've got one more chance here. Emotions didn't work. Trauma didn't work. So I was walking down the street one day and I said, I know what this is about. This is about their dignity and about being treated as if you're not even a human being. And, what they would want to say to each other is, hey, look, don't you see we're suffering and you're doing nothing about it? We're hurting here.
Yeah.
So anyway, I the next time I saw one of those big reactions sitting at the table, and instead of calling it an emotional reaction or a trauma response, I said, wow, I have a feeling that one of the things that's happening is that you're so resentful and angry about being treated as if you didn't even matter, that your dignity is being trampled on here. And oh my God, Lisa, that opened doors like you wouldn't believe, because it's like they sat up straighter, and they said, yeah, that's what this is about. This is about our dignity, about not even being seen as human beings. So it was just the right word at the right time.
Yes.
And just quickly, personally, I grew up in a very conflict-ridden family, a lot of dignity violations. And I knew, even as a little kid at 5 years old, I knew there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
And that's why I say the word has been following me around all my life.
Yeah.
Because researching it and understanding it healed me. And I healed myself with this word. And like you said, this is so much a part of mental health, this issue of not feeling worthy or not feeling good enough or not feeling like, you matter. And I see it as an epidemic in my work. So I'm just thrilled if mental health providers could, think about that word and think about how to use it in their practice. People are doing it all over already, but like you said, let's just expand this and let's get this into the mindset or the cells. I love it when you said that.
Yeah, let's put it in the water. Let's just put it in the water.
Like fluoride for your teeth.
Well, he'll need a little
dignity
in water.
Lisa. Yeah.
I really appreciate that story and the arc of it and trying to find the right word. And I just think it's so funny that you say emotions and people go, oh, well, these aren't emotions, right? Oh, and then you go, it sounds like you're feeling angry and this, and because your dignity is being violated. And then that word opened the
That
door.
was it.
And then people stand up a little taller. And what you're talking about is humanizing language and humanizing people and people across conflicts and bringing that to the table. I can't think of anything. Well, I can think of a lot of things that are emotion ridden, but I can't think of many things much more emotion ridden than like justice.
I know.
And, and the level of conflict that I know you've worked with and addressed, it just seems like such beautiful work and such ongoing work, right? I would have loved to just traveled around and followed you and watched some of these conversations, but we have so many opportunities to continue them now, even in personal settings, because I'm thinking, even as you're talking about social media and the way people treat people and, the decisions we make of, are we going to give someone the benefit of the doubt or not in this moment?
Right.
Are they a human or not? And I think a lot about, Brene Brown talks about this. I'm sure a lot of people do, about once we move to dehumanizing language and we're calling someone a name that's not actually a human thing, it makes it so much easier to just throw hateful things or violate
Oh, yeah.
essentially.
Well, there was a colleague of mine here, Tim Phillips from Beyond Conflict. We had an entire conference on that issue of the dehumanization of the other, whoever the other is. And what you're so right, because once you go down that path and think of somebody as less than human, it justifies any behavior. You can say, we got to get rid of these rodents or these these roaches or whatever the word is. And it's just a very, very slippery slope to violence and hatred. You're so right.
Yeah. So I'm going to name the 10 elements of dignity just for people who are listening who haven't heard them before. And this is easy to, search online, just look up Donna Hicks 10 elements of dignity, probably just 10 elements of dignity, and yours will come up. So acceptance of identity, recognition, acknowledgement, inclusion, safety, fairness, independence, understanding, benefit of the doubt, and accountability. And from there, we can look at temptations to violate dignity and kind of get a little more nitty gritty with that. But I have to tell you, even in sessions, because I'm still working in private practice with individual clients, like these come up all the time. Someone's telling me about a situation at work, about a relationship they're in, and I'm like, feels like there's no accountability here. It doesn't sound like you were given the benefit of the doubt. And I've referred your work to so many people and like, maybe you should share this with your boss, right? Because the language gives us something to land on that feels much more concrete than I think a lot of times what we feel is happening when we're in the midst of a conflict. So can you talk a little bit about how you identified these 10 elements and what they mean now?
Well, once I had that epiphany, that insight that this was about their dignity, and when I checked that out with the parties and they, wholeheartedly embraced this notion that this human element of dignity is not being discussed at any of these tables. And it's like the bedrock. It's the, you can't go any deeper than assaults to your dignity. And so I realized, okay, that's great. It's great to find the word, but how about putting it into practice? How am I going to use it to help people heal from these wounds to their dignity? And so I did all kinds of research looking for, something concrete. Give me something concrete.
Yeah.
And there was nothing in the literature. It was mostly, the philosophy and theology literature that I looked in, because they were the only ones who were really talking about dignity and death, but they didn't define it. They didn't operationalize it. I wanted to know how to use it. So I decided, okay, I've got to do this myself. Interviewed people from all over the world, asked them to tell me a story about ways in which they feel like their dignity is honored and ways in which they feel their dignity is, violated. Tell me a story of what happened to you.
Yes.
And so, incidentally, the people always started out with all the ways in which they felt their dignity had been dishonored.
Yeah.
They would hardly even come up with stories about when it was honored. I mean, it's kind of sad. It's a sad testimony, but anyway, so I did hundreds and hundreds of interviews with people all over every continent. Well, maybe not Antarctica. I didn't go there, but but pretty much I was all over the place. It turned out that the stories all had a very similar theme to them. And Lisa, I was expecting that I would find cultural differences in the way they told these stories and the stories that emerged. But there was this, the emotional piece that went through all of the stories was really the same, no matter where I was, doing the interview.
Yeah.
And so these 10 elements of what I now call 10 elements of dignity are those 10 patterns that emerge, like people want their identity accepted, no matter their race, their religion, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, and their gender. They want, to feel safe. And that's, not just physical safety, but psychological safety. And I'll say more about that in a minute, but you've already read them: acknowledgement, inclusion, benefit of the doubt, understanding. Understanding turns out to be a very useful one now in the polarized world that we're living in, because one of the things, understanding and benefit of the doubt, those two.
Yeah.
Because, one of the things that we do when we typically, we humans, I'm talking about us as humans now, we typically love to judge people. We kind of rush to judgment. And instead of rushing to judgment, what I say to people is, hey, look, seek deeper understanding.
Yeah.
Say to the person you're with that you're disagreeing with, hey, wait a minute, this is so different from how I experience the world. Please tell me. I want to know more. I want to understand this.
Yeah.
But, that's not our first instinct. So anyway, an accountability, like you said, fairness, equity. It's just... people say to me when I introduce these 10 elements, they say, oh, these are just common sense. And I say, yeah, they're common sense. They really are, but they're not common practice.
Right.
And they're not common knowledge. So this is part of what we have to do to educate ourselves about this profoundly essential human characteristic that we all share, each and every one of us. And so, it was so easy to help people with these 10 elements, Lisa. It was so easy to work with them because they would be feeling awful, and sort of this diffuse sense of negativity.
Yeah.
And I said, well, hey, look, let's name what happened to you. What happened to you is you weren't treated as if you had any dignity, like your identity, because something to do with your identity, you were discriminated against, or you weren't treated fairly, or you didn't feel safe, or you didn't feel included. Once I put those words to their experience, it was, again, so validating for them, because they were walking around with this horrible feeling of not being, something was wrong with them. And I would say, look, you might be feeling bad because you just had your dignity violation, but you are not bad. Something bad happened to you.
Yeah.
That was what was the problem. It's not you, it's that you were treated in such a way that left you feeling that feeling, because then I go into the neuroscience of it, Lisa, where, this is like my favorite research, because to share with people that when people have their dignity violated, these neuroscientists have shown that a dignity violation shows up in the brain in the same area as if you experienced a physical injury.
Wow.
That yucky feeling, that, oh my God, that horrible thing. Well, that is all kinds of cortisol running through our bodies. It's a stress response. It's it's real, it's not like, oh, get over it. How many times have you heard that? Oh, you're too sensitive. Just get over it.
Which if you're bleeding, someone isn't going to say, right? If you're gushing blood out your arm, people are going to address it or acknowledge it. But that's what I love about neuroscience is you can see something on an fMRI and go, look, like this is happening.
Here it is.
It's physical. Yep. It's not just imaginary.
Yeah. So that's how it all started. And again, honestly, Lisa, I mean, I think what I did was the major contribution that I've made here is to put words to what people are experiencing. And then in turn, they feel validated, they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel acknowledged, all of these things. So, it's a very powerful healing tool, and I'm sure you've seen it yourself many times because I know you use this.
Absolutely. And I feel like, the comment, this is common knowledge or common sense is so validating because it says, okay, you really got it, right? You did some big qualitative research, interviewed all these people, boiled down these concepts. I love that process, by the way. It's so nice to pull things from people's words. I feel like we, as scientists or in academia, we undervalue qualitative research. A lot of times we're like, no, I want numbers. It's like, no, get themes, get what people all over the world are saying that's the same about this stuff. It's so powerful. So it to me, that's validating in terms of the work that you've really named it and people read it and go, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. But like you said, it's not common practice. It's also not common language. I don't hear people in a lot of random conversations or online conversations going, oh, can you give me the benefit of the doubt? Or, hey, you're not giving that other person the benefit of the doubt, right? But once you have it, and these 10 elements get in your mind, in your water, in your cells, then it's so much more accessible to go, wait, I want to hear more. I want to learn more. Or notice when you are making assumptions or you are starting to judge someone or you are starting to do this us and them, like, oh, this person said one thing, I liked them. And then they said this one thing. And all of a sudden I put them in a category where they're just not human or not good, or, we do these binary things, even when we're trying to do them in the efforts of progress or justice or whatever. So I feel like making these 10 elements common language is really important right now. Like, can we just steep this into the vernacular so we can even hold each other accountable? Because it's hard to see sometimes when we're slipping into these temptations to violate dignity. And I feel like I just want to read those too, because they're so powerful. Do you mind if I do? And I just want to encourage people. I think you wrote Dignity in 2011. Is that right?
2011. Yeah.
2011. This has been around for a minute.
Been a while. Yeah.
It's out there. You can get the book. I'm sure, you could probably get it at a library too. It's on Audible.
It's on Audible. Yeah.
I've listened to it and read it, so I highly recommend this book. I can't any more highly recommend it. If you're listening to this episode and are ready to learn an approach to trauma-informed yoga that is deeply rooted in dignity, the Yoga for Trauma online training program, or Y4T as it's come to be known, could be the perfect fit for you. Y4T is an 8-week certification for health and wellness professionals who want to offer yoga and somatic tools to people navigating the impacts of trauma. Students often come to this program having experienced the power of somatic practices like yoga and wanting to pass on the healing benefits to others with skill and purpose. Y4T walks you through sequential weeks of training, covering the complexities of PTSD and complex trauma, while also explaining how human biology, somatic practices, and yoga can offer opportunities for healing. The program leaves you clear about how to respond to different trauma responses in a way that's rooted in dignity and responsive to the various ways our brains and bodies respond to trauma. When you join the program, I'll guide you through 8 modules and 8 yoga classes, so you'll get all the background information alongside the experience of your yoga practice. We have one last cohort opening this fall, so if your ears are perking up and you're feeling called to learn more, I'm officially inviting you to visit howwecanheal.com/Y4T. That's the letter Y, the number 4, and the letter T, to apply for the Yoga for Trauma online training program And if you mention this podcast in your application, we'll offer you a special bonus. One more time, nice and slow. Visit howwecanheal.com/Y4T to learn more. Looking forward to seeing you there. So the 10 temptations to violate: taking the bait, saving face, shirking responsibility. I feel like those can go hand in hand, right? Like, oh, I don't want to put myself out there, so I'm not going to stand up against whatever's happening. Seeking false dignity, seeking false security, avoiding conflict. I'm just going to raise my hand on that one. Being the victim, resisting feedback, blaming and shaming others to deflect your own guilt, engaging in false intimacy, and demeaning gossip. So with these temptations to violate dignity, I could see we could go through and be like, oh, I don't do that. I don't do that. But I think we all do all of them at some point or another.
If we're honest, if we're human, we do that. Yeah.
Yeah, because, we want to save face and we get dragged into things, and it's hard to show up and speak your truth when it's vulnerable, and we want security and we want to be looked at well and all these things. And so I just want to normalize all of the temptations to violate and just make them a general thing that humans do, which I think that's how you present it, right? And I think when we do that, we can be really more honest with ourselves of, is this what I'm doing right now? Is this what we're doing right now?
Yeah.
I think these are really important to name right now in this day and age and forever, probably, because these are also windows into dignity, right? Like once we go, oh, I'm doing this thing, then we can shift into, all right, let me go back to understanding. Let me go back to inclusion. Let me go back to giving this person the benefit of the doubt. There's bridges there, right?
Well, let me set those 10 temptations up a little bit, because they shocked me when I learned this. Somebody said to me, you got to read the literature in evolutionary biology.
Yes.
And I didn't even know such a literature existed, because what this biologist was telling me is that there's a whole field of study that is all about what our involuntary responses are. We humans, again, we're talking at the human level, not at any one particular group of people, but at the human level, that human beings react to threat in very predictable ways. And it's part of they call internal architecture. Our structures in our brain produce these, it's like an instinct, the fight and flight instinct. Everybody knows that. Yeah. But it's something that happens so automatically that we don't even think about it a lot of the time. And I mean, just imagine that somebody's caught you in a lie and you're like a deer in the headlights, oh my God, you try to save face, you try to cover it up, you don't want to look bad. Because the key piece of this, that in the evolutionary sense, the reason this is important is that we evolved these reactions because we don't like to look bad in the eyes of others. We humans feel like we need the connection with others. And if we look bad, we're going to be unsafe if we are cast out of a group, for example, for doing something bad. So all of these mechanisms, these 10 temptations, are ways to protect ourselves from shame, from humiliation, from looking bad. And they're involuntary. Like you said, they come so quickly and so fiercely that we don't even know that we don't even have a consciousness of the fact that, whoops, we're tied up now in some evolutionary loop. And we humans, here's the good news that these biologists tell us, we have what it takes to reroute that response. We humans, we have a prefrontal cortex, this part right here, which is the executive functioning. We can, if we learn, if we are committed to understanding these quick involuntary responses that we have, and say to ourselves, whoa, wait a minute, I don't want to do that. I don't want to take the bait. I don't want to return the harm when somebody harms me, because then I'm going to become a perpetrator,
Right. Yes.
So anyway, all of these things were functional from an evolutionary perspective way, 100,000 years ago when they evolved, but they're still with us today. We're haunted by these. This is part of E.O. Wilson says, this is part of our evolutionary struggle, that we have to stop ourselves. We have to learn when we're in that moment of wanting to save face or wanting to, avoid conflict or blame somebody else for, and again, the evolutionary biologists really helped put words to things, because we already knew fight and flight.
Yeah.
Little did we know there were like 10 other ways, probably more than that. I haven't even discovered all of them, but it's a human response. But the good news is we have what it takes to reroute our responses. We can push the pause button and reflect. I have a colleague here at Harvard, Ron Heifetz, who came up with the idea of going to the balcony when you feel yourself lured by these temptations.
Yes.
Push the pause button, try to get yourself up to a higher level and look at your own behavior, look at what you're doing, and then you make a decision. So it's, again, this is such fundamental knowledge about what it means to be human, Lisa, that we don't learn anywhere. As I told you, the only dialogue about dignity that took place in the research that I did was in theology and philosophy.
Right.
And we were into the intellectual parts of it. I was into the practical. How do we make this a way of life? How do we do this? How do we live with dignity? How do we lead with dignity?
Yes.
How do we connect with others with dignity? So
yes. And the social elements of that, right? And I just have to say, many of the things you're describing, you've mentioned shame and you've mentioned neurobiology, and there's so much in the trauma world, and we're understanding more and more how we respond to threat, how we respond to harm. And these are bridges to get, like, shame is such a sticky, heavy place and emotion that can be sneaky. And these are ways that we can step out of it together. That's another thing we know and we see in memes, like we don't heal alone, we heal together. It's not linear. That's all fine, great. Here's some tools to help us individually and collectively cross that bridge. And that's why I just feel like this is so powerful. And especially with what you just said about leading with dignity. Okay, how do we get these tools in the hands of people who are in front of and influencing other people, so that entire groups, it's just normalized. This is just being human. It's okay. We're going to work through the conflict. We're not going to avoid it. We're not going to pretend it doesn't exist. We're going to know, hey, we all have these biological symptoms. They kind of, they're not expired. They're not gone yet, but they're not really functional in life now. So how can we just acknowledge them and work through when they come up in a relatively peaceful, constructive way?
In a non-shaming way. So I have some colleagues who have done a lot of research on humiliation. And it's the same thing, that we have a biological resistance, like we're allergic to humiliation. We hate humiliation. And it's for the same reason. We don't like to look bad in the eyes of others. And so it's real. And if people in a leadership position, what I argue is that, look, those of us who have power over other people, people who are in leadership positions, they have to be role models for this. Yeah. And they have, I've been doing a lot of workplace interventions recently in the last few years, and employees are absolutely terrified to speak up when something bad happens to them at work, when somebody violates their dignity, especially their boss or their manager. And, it's like an epidemic in the workplace. And I remember the very first time I went into a corporation to do the dignity work, I interviewed lots and lots of the employees, a few hundred employees, and I showed them the 10 elements of dignity. And I'd say to them, okay, tell me which ones are most violated in your workspace. Yeah. Which one pops up right away? And to my surprise, I'm thinking it would have been something to do with identity or something to do with fairness or accountability or acknowledgement, whatever.
Yeah.
No, 80% of them said that they were, they felt unsafe speaking up.
Wow.
Unsafe. And like safety was the most violated because and I said, whoa, because in the beginning, I wasn't expecting that. As I told you, I was expecting other of the elements. But then I explored it with them more and they said, no, we do not feel safe to speak up to our boss.
Yeah.
And when they violate our dignity. And at that juncture, I said, okay, what we have to do with my team and I said, we have to figure out how to help people become really good at giving each other feedback so that it isn't a shaming experience, so that it can be seen as a growth opportunity rather than, because here, we all have blind spots. We all have blind spots and we all, violate dignity without even knowing it. So, a true friend or a true colleague would be one who would say to me, Donna, at that staff meeting the other day, you probably weren't even aware of it, but you really did humiliate so-and-so. You said, I know you were joking, but that person didn't find what you're saying funny and she didn't feel unsafe. She felt unsafe.
Yeah.
So I worked up this whole practice of how do you give feedback? Way where people can actually hear it, where it's not delivered as a weapon.
Yes.
But instead it's delivered as an opportunity for growth, that you can have your blind spots illuminated and you won't go around, breaking up relationships because you don't even know what you're doing. So anyway, that was one of the most powerful insights, that it was about safety and speaking up. And back to the leadership with this piece, if the leadership team, let's just say it's a leadership team, because a lot of the corporate work I've done has been with, executive leadership teams. If they don't make it safe for people to speak up, to say, hey, look, we might be violating your dignity and we don't want to do that. But I want you to feel comfortable coming to me and telling me or telling us when you're not, you're feeling like you've had your dignity violated. And so that piece alone right there, Lisa, can shift a culture.
Yeah.
Where the leadership is so committed to this dignity work and understands that when people feel their dignity is being honored, oh my gosh, all great things happen. There's research that shows that trust increases, loyalty increases, willingness to give discretionary energy increases, their engagement with their work and their colleagues goes way up. And, the last thing that this research likes to point out is that profits also increase when people are happy and feel like they're being cared for in the workplace. So this is for leaders, Lisa, it's like it should be the foundation of their leadership repertoire.
Yeah.
Understanding dignity, understanding how people react when they have their dignity violated, understanding these 10 temptations and all the struggles that we as humans have with these, involuntary instincts that are in our brains that we have to control. So, that's what led me to writing the second book, Leading with Dignity, How to Create a Culture that Brings Out the Best in People, because I realized that if you only work with let's say you go into an organization and where somebody's having a conflict, if you don't look at the systemic issues that are going on, because, what I mean by systemic issues are the policies that organizations develop could be dignity honoring and they could be dignity violating. Like one of the big ones that I hear everywhere I go, even to this day, is pay inequity between men and women.
Oh, yeah.
So, these things are real, these systemic dignity violations. So good leadership knows how to treat their people interpersonally, but they also know how to create policy that is across the board, dignity honoring for everybody, no matter their rank, their, people may differ in status, but they're equal in dignity.
Mm,
That's like
mhm.
the sine qua non of this leadership approach.
It just makes me think of Jennifer Fried's work in institutional courage, right? Like the
Ah,
institution having the courage to treat people with dignity and I think these principles and the book Leading with Dignity would be great resources for those institutions to come back to and go, how can we practically apply this? And how can
right.
we want to be diverse and inclusive, or we want to be just, but how? Okay, well, let's look at these and let's apply those and use them in conversations that get difficult.
Well, Lisa, I get requests all the time to talk with people who are doing DEI work.
Yes.
Because they say that, it can be a shaming experience for some groups, but the minute they introduce the word dignity to the training, because they do trainings, you know how they do that, there's seminars and stuff, that people have a very, very different reaction to the word dignity than the word diversity.
Yeah.
Diversity they see as something not them, something separate from them, but dignity, and they introduce the whole idea that everybody wants to be treated with dignity, then that becomes the unifying concept in the DEI work. It's like they're not even using diversity anymore. Many of my colleagues, it's like dignity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes. Oh, I love that so much.
So this, again, it's the power of the word, the power. We started out with this, and we're coming around to it every time. Every conversation I have, it always comes around to the power of the word and how it affects people deep in their soul, because we all want to be seen. We all want that feeling of being included, and it's just such a beautiful, and being connected with other people, because if you want connection, you better learn how to honor people's dignity, because dignity is in the connection.
Yes. And it's different than, I know a lot of times when you're, surveying an audience, people use the word respect, or they're trying to grapple or get their hands around it. But it's so funny, even between me and my partner, he's has a history in law enforcement and emergency response. And the word respect to him doesn't even mean the same thing that it means to me. Right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, I feel like there can be this hierarchy and these things. And so dignity, like you said, it just seems to land, especially when you go through and operationalize it and look at all these elements and look at these temptations and look at what it means to lead with dignity. Like, people just, I think they do feel seen, and it does feel like, oh, this makes so much sense, which is great. And so now we just need to put it in practice and get it in language and disseminate it. I think keep practicing it, really, because
keep trying.
Done. I'd love for us to be like, check, dignity is affirmed around the world.
Right.
It's going to be a process.
Well, it's a process, because, look, I always tell people that I'm a recovering dignity violator myself.
Yeah.
I'm in recovery. And, I've got an organization here in Boston called Dignity Violators Anonymous. And anybody's welcome. Come on down, But the truth is, we have good days and bad days.
Yeah, totally.
There are some days when I can bite my husband's head off, and we can get into these wrangles, and it's like, and we have to stop ourselves and say, okay, you know what, we're going down the wrong path here. It doesn't feel right. We're violating each other's dignity. So if you have a kind of words that you use to recognize and acknowledge that you're in a bad place with the back and forth between you and whomever you're in a little conflict with. So that helps too. And I just wanted to say one other thing about leadership. Because walking the talk is the most important thing, and making people feel safe to speak up if something bad happens. One of the other things that I learned from Archbishop Tutu when I worked with him for that decade was that when people feel their dignity has been assaulted, he would tell me that the most important thing that they need in order to put the past to rest and to let go and move on in their lives, they need acknowledgement of the suffering that they've endured.
Yes.
we need somebody to say to us, oh my God, that was wrong. That was terrible what happened to you. That should have never happened to you.
Mm.
And again, it's that validation that the acknowledgement gives us. And if this has to be something that leaders, I think, also embody and model, because there's nothing more powerful than somebody telling you, oh my God, of course you're upset. You've been treated badly. You've been, treated unfairly or discriminated. There's nothing more satisfying that a victim of a dignity violation can experience than knowing somebody has seen what it was like to go through that and to use those words, oh, I'm so sorry. It should have never happened to you. But anyway, that's the other kind of work I do a lot with in the corporate world, is both this giving and receiving feedback and the acknowledgement exercise. Because, the other thing, Lisa, not everybody really is gifted in acknowledgement, because what we humans tend to do, and I have had to unlearn this myself, when I'm trying to acknowledge for somebody who has experienced a dignity violation, oftentimes I used to say, oh, and let me tell you, I know that because the same things happened to me. I know that. Well, that doesn't help in that moment.
Yeah.
Just imagine the person is bleeding. They don't need to hear your story.
Right.
Because then they've got to take care of you.
Yeah. Oh, I cut my arm once too. Mine's bleeding right now. Can we address that first?
Right. So just this whole idea of letting the person, feel your empathy, feel that you see them, that you acknowledge what happened in a way that makes them understand that they're not bad, but that something bad happened to them.
Yes. I mean, so much of what you're talking about in my ears right now, especially, it's like parenting, right? Being able to communicate with, like you said, I think from a young age, you can be 5 years old and know something's off, that's a dignity violation. And if the people around you have the language and have the capacity to step in and say, that shouldn't have happened, and that was terrible that happened to you, and just to acknowledge and connect and like validate that inner reality of like, this wasn't right. That's so powerful.
Really
and then
powerful.
I think about the culture around us that prevents that. I mean, whether it's in parenting, or I'm thinking of just being an American, and in the US, it's a very litigious society. And you don't say, oh, I made a mistake right away, because, oh, then you took accountability and then someone's going to come after you. And how it's just set up in that type of culture to shirk responsibility, right? To immediately try to save face because you're afraid. And there's just so much in that harms us in the end, because things then might become this big, long-term, drawn-out lawsuit that costs so much money. And when it could have just been like, oh, I'm really sorry, that shouldn't have happened to you. Let me take accountability for what I did do, and you take accountability for your part, and we move on, or we repair, or we find a way. But culture can get in the way, right?
Definitely.
So many scenarios.
We're fighting big stuff, Lisa. We're fighting big structures, and some of them are psychological structures, and others are more, like institutional structures. But these psychological barriers that you just beautifully illustrated, they are as real as any of the other, like bad policy or whatever. So and I think it's hard work. It's all hard work. And yet, I'm telling you, at the same time, and I know you know this, but for your listeners or your viewers, it is so gratifying to put this stuff into your daily lives. It's so enriching, when you find that you can make a connection with somebody by honoring their dignity, and they could even be strangers. This woman, Barbara Fredrickson, I don't know if you've ever come across her work. She's a affective neuroscientist. She wrote this book, Love 2.0. And she said you can have an experience of what she calls positive resonance, where let's say you're in a grocery line and you're talking to the cashier and, just having a pleasant exchange. She said, you can experience that feeling of connection in a 2-minute interaction.
Yeah.
By, oh, how was your day today? Boy, this looks like it's really been busy. How are you doing back there? And just making that connection. And, I just love this whole idea of hers that love is in the connection. And the way to connect, in my view, the piece that I've added to it is you connect by honoring their dignity.
Yes.
So it is, there's so many simple truths that come out of this dignity work that and yet at the same time, putting them into practice and living that way, we can have a lot of challenges, because of all these cultural barriers you were talking about and the systemic, indignities that they're all around us. I mean, we're fighting a battle for the evolution of our species. I do believe this. I believe this stuff, we're trying to evolve consciousness here. Yeah. About the way we affect each other and the way we feel when we're treated one way or the other. And I'll tell you, once we get this consciousness, once we get it more pervasive, and, as I've told you, and, by reading Leading with Dignity, that now we have it in schools. We have dignity trainings and dignity learning in schools. And so once it becomes second nature to people, and like you said, I confirm that kids know this stuff. They know when something's not right and they're not being treated well. So, we are all here trying to move this evolution of our consciousness forward in a way that gets us all better at loving, gets us all better at connecting and having really meaningful, simple, meaningful interactions with people. But we're going through a rough patch now.
Yeah. And I mean, when I think of across time, like there's always growth, there's always a rub, there's always a rough patch, but it does feel like there's opportunity here. There's we could really shift a gear right now. And I think we could shift a gear with this type of terminology and knowing, and I also love bringing it back to love, because that's something that I'm sure we all relate to in our unique way, but it's even more human, right? What's more human than to love and to care and to connect? And so we're treating each other with dignity. We're honoring our own and other people's dignity. And that brings us in, I think, towards something most, if not all of us want. And even we could say from an evolutionary biology perspective, like we want, right? We don't want the humiliation. We don't want the shame. Those get us out of the group. We want to be seen and recognized for who we are. And that, in my mind and heart, is being loved.
Exactly. And, E.O. Wilson, he was my favorite author that I read, this evolutionary biologist. He died not too long ago, a couple of years ago. And I heard him being interviewed on NPR because he had written this last book. I think it was called The Meaning of Life or something like that. And he said, he pointed, just like you did right now, he said, look, we have a choice to make, we humans. We can either, because we're born to connect and to be and to love each other. We have that capacity in us. We've inherited that capacity from our ancestors as well. But we also have the capacity to destroy each other if those connections that we feel threatening. Yeah. So, and he says, all right, so here we are at a crossroads. Either we use all these self-preservation instincts, these 10 temptations, and we, fight and we win and we gain all this power, or we stop ourselves and say, hey, wait a minute, what is it that we really want? What is it that we really want? And for him, as this, hardcore scientist and everything, he says, we want love and connection. And we want to be able to empathize with each other. And he thinks that empathy, I'm sure if I had a chance to talk to him, he would use the word dignity as well, but I never got to sit down with him. But, he says we have the power of connection.
Yes.
We have it in our makeup, in our brains. We have the capacity to connect with others through these mirror neurons. And so we have to make a choice. We have to make a choice. And he was an optimist, and he felt we're going to make that choice. We humans. But I think with the dignity language and the dignity understanding and the deep commitment, because, the most important thing here, this is another deep concept that I learned from Archbishop Tutu, and that is that if we don't accept our own dignity, our own inherent value and worth, and accept the fact that we came into the world with dignity, with value and worth, he says, if we don't do that, if we don't accept that, we're not going to get anywhere. And he would always say the people who do the most harm are those who don't even think that they're worthy. And, they're kind of fighting to gain their worth.
Yes.
And he said, but they don't have to fight because they have it. It's in all of us. So that's, like he says, that's the very first step for all of us, is claiming our own dignity. And that's a joyful moment. I'm telling you, it's such a joyful, I'm telling you but for me, I was an adult before I learned that I had dignity, I was studying this stuff myself. I learned so much along the way. And even in the roughest times, I can say, okay, things are tough, but it doesn't mean that I'm not worthy. It just means I've got a challenge that I have to work through.
Exactly. And I think if we can bring that self-compassion, you might call it, thinking of all these windows and ways we have in, but just connecting with that inherent worth. It makes me think of recently, I was listening to a meditation. It was affirmations. And they were like, I am good enough. And I am, and all these positive things, but I was thinking of them as if I was telling them to my daughter. And they just felt so flat. I was like, that's not enough. Like, to really describe how I feel for her, I'm like, your simple presence is the wildest gift to the world. Like, that's how I would rephrase. You're good enough. Good enough for what? Good enough for you. Like, your simple presence is the wildest gift to the world. I want you to know that in your bones. And I think if we did all know that in our bones, and if we did get that care from a young age, or get those healing opportunities later on through our work, through inner work, through community, through whatever, then we go, oh, I don't have to prove that. I don't have to save face. I don't have to shirk responsibility. I don't have to do all these other things to try to protect and make sure I'm okay enough to be a part of the group, right? Like, I can be. There
you go. You got it.
And
it's that simple.
Yeah. And it's
hard to get to where that place where you're just describing. It's hard to get to it, but we got to keep trying, because I think our species, we're either going to evolve or we're going to destroy ourselves. Honestly, I think we've got to make, like E.O. Wilson said, we've got to make the choice to learn how to get better at loving and to connect with each other.
Wholeheartedly agree. And I was going to ask you, what would you say to someone? What would you say to leaders? But like, this is it. Whether you're in a leadership seat or whatever leadership seat you're in, because I think we're all in some form of leadership, right? Sure. We all impact each other. But starting with this piece of ourselves and acknowledging, like, if we can do that practice of knowing my simple presence is the wildest gift to the world, right? If like we can really know that, like, it's easy for me to say it to my daughter, and then I'm like, but me, like, is that true for me too? That's like wild. I can't go that far. But like, if we could all really have that vibrating in ourselves and walking around, and like, not in an entitled or arrogant way, but just in a deep knowing way where we don't have to work out all this other stuff, like whatever leadership seat we're in, doing that inner work is a foundation, right? There's another question I had for you, was like, what's the backstory of dignity? What's the foundation? Like, this is it, right?
This is it. This is it. You got it.
I so appreciate everything you're saying here today. And I have so many thoughts, and that maybe we'll have to have you back. I'd love to have another conversation.
We can have part two. Sure. We can do part two. Yeah.
I would love to do that.
What's your daughter's name?
Isabella.
Isabella. Oh, I love it. I love it.
Oh, she's amazing. She's just
Send me a picture. Send me a picture.
I will definitely. I will send you all like with that
Precious
invitation. I'll
thing.
send you multiple pictures. I'll send
Okay,
you
yeah,
videos.
please do. Please do.
Adorable. And it's such a opportunity to reconnect and such an opportunity to just marvel at human beings and who we are and how we are.
A miracle. We're miracles. We are all, life is a miracle. I mean, whoa.
It's amazingly, bizarrely impressive. Like when you think about it, it's like, wow. Wow. And the amount of things that are working well. And that's what I try to come back to even in a communal way, like the amount of things we are doing to work together. Let's just keep building on that. Let's use these tools. Let's keep building on that.
Love it.
So thank you so much, Donna Hicks. Please, everyone listening, I highly encourage you to listen, read, whatever your preference. There's a TED Talk, right? You can watch, listen, read, share this episode, please, and just keep getting these principles out there and encouraging us to keep practicing dignity as we move forward and hopefully choose love, right? Hopefully choose to
love.
Evolve in the direction of more love.
There you go.
Thanks so much for listening. My hope is that you walk away from these episodes feeling supported and like you have a place to come to find the hope and inspiration you need to take your next small step forward. For more information and resources, please visit howwecanheal.com. There, you'll find tons of helpful resources and the show notes for each show. Thanks for your messages, feedback, and ideas about the podcast. I love hearing from you, and I so appreciate your support. There are lots of ways you can support the show, and I'm grateful for every little bit of love you share. If you love the show, please leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, Audible, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can always visit howwecanheal.com/podcast to share your thoughts and ideas as well. Before we wrap, I want to be clear that this podcast isn't offering any prescriptions. It's not advice or any kind of diagnosis. Your decisions are in your hands, and we encourage you to consult with any healthcare professionals you may need to support you through your unique path of healing. In addition, everyone's opinion on this show is their own, and opinions can change, right? Guests share their thoughts, not that of the host or sponsors. I'd also like to send just huge thanks to our guest today, to Kyle Arizbal of Prolific Sound Solutions, and to everyone who helps support this podcast directly and indirectly. Alex, thanks for taking care of the babe and the fur babies while I record. Lastly, I'd like to give a shout out to my big brother, Matt, who passed away in 2002. He wrote this music, and it makes my heart so happy to share it with you here.